Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Audible and Hello Weather. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
I'm deep into the writing process of my iOS 11 review, and basically my days now consist of waking up, drinking coffee, playing with my puppies, and then sitting down for like 5 to 6 hours to write my review, which just happens to be written in one of the apps that we're going to talk about today, which is Ulysses. And before we get into the details of this episode, can you explain, John, the idea that we had?
Yeah, I thought it would be fun to do what I call pick two, which is Federico and I have each picked an app that we want to talk today and go in a little bit more depth about how we use it, why we use it, and that sort of thing. And as Federico said, he's picked Ulysses, and I'm going to talk a little bit about FullContact, which is an app that I don't think Federico's only just started trying it out, but we both use Ulysses quite a bit for our writing at Mac Stories and Club Mac Stories. So I guess I'll let you kick it off, Federico, and just kind of jump in as we go along, because I think you and I use it similarly, but I don't think we use it exactly identically. And I'm kind of curious about exactly what you're doing with it, especially in terms of how you're using it to write the review this year for iOS 11.
So I started using Ulysses last year, sometime in the spring, after we had David Chartier write a review of the major update that brought iPhone support. I think it was last March 2016. And I switched to Ulysses soon after. For context, it had been at that point a few years of sort of wandering around between text editors, because after my old favorite one, Editorial for iOS, wasn't getting any updates. It's an app made by an indie developer, and sometimes this happens. Your favorite app stops getting frequent updates. So I had been wandering around between different apps. I tried IA Writer, OneWriter. I think I even went back to Byword at some point. And then I realized it requires a deep change of mindset because it's very different from the other Markdown text editors. But I could just use Ulysses for all my writing, whether it's for Mac Stories or for Club Mac Stories. It's an app that can contain all of the documents that I'm working on. And so I set up Ulysses with iCloud Sync, which I'll get into this in a few minutes, but it's got several benefits over using Dropbox instead. Also, Dropbox Sync was not available at the time, so I kind of had to go with iCloud. And I set up Ulysses with a theme that I like, so you can have multiple variations of colors and font sizes and like different formatting for multiple like elements of the Markdown syntax of the app. So I created my own theme. It's called the Ticci theme. It's a very original name. And I kind of went all in and bought a dedicated font just for Ulysses. The font is Nitti, and the Nitti typeface is the font that I've always loved. It's the one used by IA Writer. So I kind of wanted to have the same aesthetic, but in Ulysses. So I bought the font from Bold Monday. It's this excellent online shop for fonts.
Yeah, that's a great font. I really like it a lot. I'm very, very jealous, but it's kind of expensive if I remember.
It is expensive, but it's an investment because it's a monospace font, but it's not ugly like other monospace typefaces. And, if you think about it, it's my job every day to look at the screen and look at words, whether it's my stuff or I'm editing other people's stuff. And I want to have a good experience. It's essential for my eyesight. It's essential for my peace of mind that I'm looking at a nice font that is readable, that can look beautiful even at bigger and smaller sizes. So I see it as an investment. And I actually send the receipt of the font to my accountant. And after some convincing, we were able to write it off as a business expense. Anyway.
Well, that's good. That's good. I love that font too, and I right there with you in terms of you need to have something that you like looking at. And I remember very well when you started using Ulysses, because I think one of the first things of mine that you edited in it, you sent it back to me and it had all reference links in it, and I had not used Ulysses before, and I thought, well, I'm never using this because this app broke my article. But eventually you figured out how to use it and not do that.
Yeah, basically what happens is is Ulysses, in addition to letting you write your own stuff, it can also act as an open in place editor. And the open in place is a feature of document providers in iOS. All of this is kind of changing with iOS 11, but we're going to talk about it. Basically, what it does is it can open text documents from other apps, which is what I did because you sent me. I think I was trying to open a draft that you shared with me using Working Copy, which is a GitHub client. And Ulysses, when it opens Markdown documents from other apps, it kind of changes the entire syntax to its own
Right.
syntax. And here, a small aside, the syntax that Ulysses uses, it's called, I think, Markdown XL, which is kind of a mix of standard Markdown and multi-Markdown with a more visual approach. I know I'm also going to talk about this in a few minutes. But basically, after setting up multiple groups, which are like folders in Ulysses, I created my theme on the Mac version. Unfortunately, you cannot create a theme directly on iOS. So I set up my theme. It's got like light and a dark version. I send the theme file to iOS. It's actually stored in iCloud Drive now. I bought the font. I installed the font with any font on iOS. Another quick aside, I also had to install San Francisco, the Apple font, a few weeks ago, and Apple has changed the way that you download the San Francisco font family from the developer website. Used to be a zip file. Now it's in an installer package to install the font on macOS. But I wanted to have the font files to bring them over to iOS 11. So I had to use this app called Pacifist on the Mac that lets you inspect an installer package. I took the files and I had to use this other app on iOS. It's called Font because any font wasn't working on iOS 11. So if you're trying iOS 11 now and you want to install a custom font, I recommend Font. It's kind of a funny name to say, but it works well.
Yeah.
So groups, theme, font, and I was basically done. My setup was done. I started using Ulysses this way last year, and in over almost a year and a half later, looks exactly the same theme, same font, same setup, still the same groups. I have archive groups where I put in all the old articles that I'm not working on anymore. It's got like thousands of those, and I'm very, very happy with the app. But I know, John, that you have questions, lots of questions for me. So please go ahead and ask me everything you want.
Sure. One of the things that Ulysses has is this right-hand panel that you can slide over, and you can put things in there like images and keywords and notes. And I know that there was a point at which, especially early when you were testing Ulysses, you were using that. Is that something you still use? And if you do, what are you using it for these days?
Not as much, and I think it's because it doesn't work the way that I would like it to work. Most of what I do with that sidebar, I think it's called the attachments sidebar. I usually add textual comments, notes, because I don't use keywords. I don't use tagging to organize my sheets. I probably should. It just never became a habit for me. I add notes, but not often because they're kind of, I forget about them because they're in a sidebar. The sidebar doesn't open automatically. You have to remember to open the sidebar, and it kind of, if I add a comment in there and then I never see the comment again, does it really matter?
Right.
So I prefer to put comments directly at the bottom of my drafts.
Yeah.
My ideal text editor, what it would do is, and I realize this is it's never going to happen. But what I want to do is, in an ideal world, I would take a photo from the Photos app, like a screenshot. I would drag and drop it into Ulysses as an image file. And Ulysses already supports this stuff because it lets you bring in native images into a sheet, which is a richer format than a standard TXT or MD file. And ideally, right now I would have this file that contains formatted text and native image files. Then I will run a script at the end and say, transform every single image file that you find in the draft into an image link by uploading all my images to this service. That's my dream. I want to have a draft with text and native image attachments. At the end, I want to push a button and say, take all these image attachments, keep their position in the article, and upload them for me, and replace them with the final link.
Yeah.
That is a super niche use case. It's never going to happen. So that's why I don't use the sidebar.
I'm the second person who would want that. I mean, that is,
It's-
yeah. I mean, it may just be the two of us and maybe the other guys on the Mac Stories team, but yeah, that would be fantastic to be able to do that. Thanks to Audible for supporting App Stories. Audible includes an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and a whole lot more from all sorts of different sources, whether it's audiobook publishers, broadcasters, entertainers, magazines, newspapers, you name it. When you join Audible as a member, you get one free audiobook every month and exclusive sales of 30% off regularly priced audiobooks and unlimited access to things like the channel's content. In addition, if you download a book and don't like it, you can swap it out for a new one. It's called Audible's Great Listen Guarantee, and it's a fantastic way to try out new content at no risk whatsoever to yourself because you can just swap it out if you don't like it. What's more, it's easy to listen wherever you are. There are, of course, iOS apps, but there's apps for the desktop and for all sorts of other devices, so you can always have something nearby to listen to Audible when you need it. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. All you have to do is go to audible.com/appstories to download a title for free and start listening. I'm going to recommend a book that just came out. This is a great pick for your next car trip, your daily commute, or while you're working out, which is what I do sometimes. If you're a fan of this show, you'll probably find The One Device, The Secret History of the iPhone by Brian Merchant, really interesting. It tells the story of the iPhone's creation from the perspective of the engineers who worked on it. There are a lot of compelling stories here to listen to, including things about the secrecy of the project, the choice of going with an OS X based operating system over an iPod interface, and a whole lot more. It's a really great book. Of course, you don't have to go with that book. You can download whatever you want for your free audiobook. Just go to audible.com/appstories. That's audible.com/appstories, so they know that you're coming from the show, and you can start listening right away. Thanks again to Audible for sponsoring App Stories. You know, there's another feature that I don't really use, and I've been thinking about ways it might be useful, which is the filters feature. Have you ever used that? I guess it's just like, it's a little bit, it looked to me, I haven't really played around with it all that much, even though I've been using the app about the same amount of time as you have. But it looks a little bit like setting up smart playlists in iTunes or something.
So I haven't used filters much yet. I plan to, because right now, as I said, I'm working on my review of iOS 11, and I'm taking advantage of the different formatting options of Ulysses to mark certain bits of the review as either I'm finished, or I need to double check this later, or this feature is broken right now. Let's see again in a future beta if it works. And Ulysses, thanks to Markdown Excel, they have different styles for certain types of blocks of text. So you can have like a comment block, or you can have like a raw code string. You can have, I forget what it's called, like an annotation that you enter by typing double colon, and it creates like this special block of text. And because in my theme, I set these special styles to have a unique color, when I open my draft, I see all these color highlights, and I know visually, well, that means it's like it's an image placeholder, or it's something that I should check later because it's broken right now. And what I want to do with filters is I want to create a filter for each of these special text styles, so I can see, let me see all the features that are broken and that I should double check. So I create a filter for the ++ shortcode for comments. So I should be able to find, in theory, if it works the way that I expect it to work, I should find all the sheets that contain that information. So that's what I plan to do. I'm pretty sure that Ulysses allows you to create filters based on text contents.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a really interesting use case for it, because, and this also what you're doing with the colors is interesting to me because you're using features that aren't really meant for what you're using them for.
No.
You're using codes that normally would mean this is a comment or this is code or something like that. But because you've got them color coded in a particular way in your theme, you can see them visually very, very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not meant for this kind of use case, but I decided to use Ulysses this year instead of Scrivener. I used Scrivener last year for my iOS 10 review. because it offered the ability to apply color highlights to different bits of text. And that's used by novelists, for example, to indicate sections where some character does something. And in my version of the sort of technical novel, what I want to do is I want to indicate features and I want to mark up certain elements because it's a beta and I need to double check it later, all these reasons. But
Hmm.
these features, as you say, they're not meant for this case. Like one of the shortcuts that I'm using, it's meant for entering code, like programming languages into the app to make
Right.
sure that they keep the same syntax and they're not escaped to a different format. And instead, I'm using all these features to add different meanings that I know they're not exposed in the UI. I personally know what they mean, but actually in the app, they have sometimes even the opposite meaning because the comment is a block of text that is not exported into the
Right.
final draft. Instead, in my article, in my review, comments have to be exported. So it's another reason why I need a filter, because I need to be able later to find the comments and remove them because they need to be part of the final document.
Right.
So I want to see how filters work.
That's interesting. Now, you mentioned before too that you have groups for things like Club Mac stories and Mac stories, and then Ulysses has the concept of groups, which are a little bit like folders, and then sheets, which are the actual documents within the groups. How are you doing the iOS 11 review? Do you have groups for sections of the review, or is each sheet a section of the review? How does that work?
So the review is a group and it's called iOS 11 review. And each chapter is a sheet. And inside each sheet, it starts with a H2 markdown title and the subsections of that chapter. So, for example, let's say that Safari is a chapter. It is going to be a chapter. And the sheet starts with $! Safari, which means this is a H2 title. Then sections like Safari View Controller or Safari Reader View will be H3 or H4, H5 title in the setting order of hierarchy in the review. And I think it's better this way because it allows me to keep everything closer together and the structure feels more logical to me of having sheet as chapters instead of breaking everything up into groups. I think it's more convenient for me to have everything in a single place.
Yeah, that's one thing about Ulysses that I tend to agree with that, just because I think it's a little hard to navigate between sheets sometimes, especially
Yeah.
if you hide those columns to the left, right? It's a little easier on a Mac because it allows for the tabbed interface, so you can open two documents that way and switch between tabs if, for instance, you're copying information from one spot to another or something like that. But on iOS, once you kind of hide away that column of sheets, you have to kind of go back and forth, in and out if you have, and that I could see with a document as big as what you're creating that would be a little bit cumbersome.
Yeah, ideally, I would like to have a feature where you can embed sheets within each other.
Right.
So, like, I could have a group of let's call them sub sheets, and they would be compiled back into a main sheet at the end. But that's probably asking for a level of complexity that the Ulysses developers don't want to add to the app. So it's just better for me to usually have like an active group where this applies to beyond the review. I have an active group where I keep all the sheets that I'm working on right now, and I have an archive group where once I'm done with those sheets, with those articles, I just move them there. So they are still available in the app, but they've been archived. And I should say that there are so many design decisions or little touches that may make me appreciate writing and editing in Ulysses. One of them is the beautiful way of entering links and footnotes. And I know that for some Markdown users, this feels like heresy. Like they don't get it, they don't like it. And believe me, it took me weeks to get used to this behavior. So in most Markdown text editors, the entire point of Markdown is that it lets you look at the source text. So you see the square brackets, you see the parentheses, you see the links, you see all the formatting. Because the formatting is so minimal, it doesn't bother you. The syntax doesn't get in the way as much as HTML does, for example. But Ulysses takes that a step further. And things like images or hyperlinks or footnotes, they are represented with a single colored, like a little tag, like a little button in the text. And so you enter a link by expanding that button, and it kind of opens like a folder on top of the text or inside the text, and you paste the link. Same for footnotes. You don't see the actual footnote syntax. You just double tap this button and you type in the text into this panel, and then you close it again. And when you look at your text in Ulysses, it's beautiful. It's just the text and all these special tags that when you double tap them, you open to reveal more context. But then when you export the final product, it's all standard markdown.
Right.
So it's got the links, it's got the footnotes. And that's great for me because it lets me view both the article and the final product that I should save in WordPress with two different views, but under the hood, it's all really markdown. It's just, it's presented in two different ways for two different contexts. One is for the reading and the editing. The other is for exporting and sending to other apps.
Right. Yeah, it does take some getting used to that for sure. I definitely had to get used to that as well. But I think it does exactly what you say, which is those links, which can, those URLs can get long, and they break the flow of reading something, especially when you're going through the editing process.
Right. And I generally believe has been one of the best improvements, the way that I work on iOS. And then when you consider all the other features of Ulysses, like there's manual sorting for sheets, which is great for the review because I can manually sort chapters in the order that I want them to be at the end. There's excellent automation with workflow. I wrote about this briefly on Mac Stories. I have more workflows on Club Mac Stories in the archive. All my Club Mac Stories automation is based on workflow, creating sheets and retrieving contents of sheets from Ulysses. It's a great pro app on iOS, and it's constantly getting better. I'm really excited to see what happens with iOS 11. But yeah, I love Ulysses, and it was an obvious choice when I had to decide what app am I going to use for the iOS 11 review. Well, it just makes sense that it's Ulysses this year because I know the app so much at this point. It wouldn't make sense for me to go anywhere else.
Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks to Hello Weather for supporting App Stories. Hello Weather is a great weather app because it strikes an excellent balance between friendly design and data density. You can see exactly the info you need and no more. The app supports multiple data sources like dark sky and weather underground, and makes it easy to see the current conditions, next few hours, and weekly forecast all at a glance. Additional stats are all just one tap away. Hello Weather is free to try and use forever, but you can join their fan club to get advanced features. To find out more, go to helloweatherapp.com or go straight to the App Store with the link in our show notes. Thanks again to Hello Weather for its support of App Stories. Should we talk about FullContact?
Yes.
Okay, so FullContact is an app that I've been using for maybe 3 or 4 months now, I'd say. And contact management is not something that I've ever really spent a lot of time on, because for years I just had an iCloud account that I shared with my family, and this really is more of an iTunes discussion, why I had a shared Apple ID that we were using to sync with media and that's kind of thing from iTunes. But it got kind of messy because it was full of my kids' friends and my wife's friends and people who, some of them who I didn't really need their contacts, but I didn't use contacts a lot because in my day job I had a whole Microsoft Exchange thing going on, which is a totally different and separate list that I didn't have to, mix with those contacts. But especially once I started writing at Mac Stories, I started needing to deal with contacts a little bit more. First, in the first instance, with dealing with developers who contact us a lot, but also since the beginning of the year when I started selling the sponsorships, both for this show and for Mac Stories, I had a lot more people who I was dealing with on a regular basis. And they would be spread around all over the place because I have people in my email, my personal email, my business email, the Mac Stories email account that I've got, my iCloud account, all these different accounts. And while having good email search goes a long way to finding the contact information you need for someone, it's not great and it slows you down, especially when you have a high volume of email. So I started looking around for a solution and I came upon FullContact, which started its life out as an app called CoBook, which was on both iOS and the Mac. It was a menu bar app on the Mac and an iOS app as well, which at the time won an award on the Mac, I know from Apple, as being one of the best of the year apps in 2012, which I found in the archive of the Mac Stories articles about that. But it got bought and it became FullContact eventually. And that's what I've been using. It does all sorts of things, but what it does best, I think, is that it merges contacts from a bunch of different sources and suggests ways to fill them in with information that it finds publicly available on the internet. And that's what I've been using to manage my contacts ever since.
So you mentioned it integrates multiple accounts together, like Gmail and iCloud. Can you do this setup on iOS, or is it like a Mac only feature?
No, you can do it on iOS too. And FullContact has a free program as well as a premium one. And with the free plan, you only get one email account. If you want multiple accounts, you need to pay for the service. And then you can have, I think at the level that I've been paying, which is $100 a year or $833 a month, that lets you have up to 5 accounts. So you can set this up whether it's on your iOS device or on your Mac, and it will sync contacts that you have in Gmail and iCloud, and in whether that happens to be the Contacts app on iOS or the Contacts app on your Mac.
So what happens after you merge all these contacts on FullContact? Does it push the changes back to the iOS address book, and it kind of reconciles multiple people into one master address book?
Yeah, it does. It's two-way syncing, and it's with the paid program, it is real-time syncing. So the minute something goes in there, it propagates out to all your devices, all your iOS devices and your Mac, and it'll show up in the main Contacts app as well, which is kind of nice.
Hmm.
And you can not only can you hook up email apps to it, but you can also hook up Twitter accounts and things like Foursquare. And you might wonder why you'd want to do that. But for instance, with Twitter, if it can find the same person on Twitter and the people you follow, as well as in your contact book, it'll add their avatar, for instance. So you have a picture, or it'll add their where they live if they've listed that in their Twitter profile. So it pulls from things like Twitter to get additional information. And what's nice is it doesn't automatically add it. It asks you, it has a section called updates, and it suggests that you update it. So it has to get you to acknowledge that you want that, because it does make mistakes once in a while, especially if I just had someone's name that was a fairly common name and their email address. It might confuse that with another person who has a profile on Flickr or Twitter or GitHub or something like that, and try to pull in the wrong information. So it's good that you have to go through and confirm that you want that added, but it pulls from all sorts of different profiles that are publicly available and fills out the information that way. And the syncing is just fantastic because it happens very, very quickly.
So how do you use this in practice? What's the benefit of having all these contacts together? Like, because usually what I do is I go to my email client and I'm like, oh, I need to email John. So I either bring up the compose screen and I start typing John, and then the email client suggests me which email address to use, or I use search and I do things like, I remember that John emailed me 2 weeks ago, so just let me find the message again and reply, or just send a new message. So I'm wondering, what's the benefit of having this more powerful address book? How do you use this?
There's no doubt that that works a lot of the time, having something auto suggest in your email. The problem is that when you have multiple email accounts, sometimes you forget where that person is or where the conversation took place. And this allows all that to be pulled out of your email and have it somewhere else that's a little faster to get at. Another thing that it does that I've really enjoyed is that with Gmail accounts, it can actually pull detailed contact information out of signature blocks from Gmail accounts but only when you reply to someone. So the assumption is if you reply to someone, that's someone you deal with and you want to have their contact information. So it'll pull that out and auto-populate that into your contacts, which is nice. So on the one hand, set it and forget it. You don't have to worry about it. It's going to be in your contacts and you don't have to worry about where you found it, and you don't go searching as much. The other thing that it does is because it suggests information from other sources on the internet, it fills out a little profile on people. So now you know the name of the company they work at and maybe the URL. so that if I'm, for instance, dealing with a sponsor and all I have is a name and an email address at the beginning, because it's the first time they've ever contacted me, I can go through and I can, oh, okay, well, there's the URL. I can go check out what their product is, find a little bit more information about that, and find out more information about the person I'm dealing with, which is helpful.
What about, because obviously I'm going to ask about this, what about automation? Like, because it's a web service, so I assume you can hook it up to Zapier and do things with it?
You can. It has an API that's not an API really for users, because it's an API that's designed for using these features where it pulls information from other social profiles. So for instance, if you're building help desk software, you might want to use some of their APIs to take someone's email address and build a real quick profile of who they are and see a little more information about them. But notwithstanding the fact that it doesn't have a direct API for dealing with for automating your own contacts, it does have integrations with Zapier. And you can, for instance, if you have an invoicing system, you can have the invoicing system pull directly from your contacts in FullContact using Zapier to fill out the invoice with a name and an address and an email and all those sorts of things. Or you could send your contacts to a spreadsheet, Excel or Sheets or something along those lines. Or maybe you want to create your own little CRM of some kind where you've got a customer relationship management system that auto-populates the contacts into text files or an Evernote note, so you can keep notes on your contacts with people. Those are a few of the uses I think you can use Zapier for.
Hmm. It's interesting to me that Apple for years offered the native Twitter and Facebook integrations on iOS. Now, of course, they're being removed on iOS 11, but they
Right.
never truly took advantage of those features to make the address book more powerful. And iCloud syncing of contacts works fine for me most of the time, but I think I could use some of these modern integrations, especially for like the idea of attaching like a Twitter username or a website link to someone's profile card. That's very intriguing to me. Every time I try one of these modern email clients and they offer those rich contact panels that you can open and see, oh, well, this person is also on Twitter or they have this website. That's useful to me. And to have that all the time in a standalone service in iPhone app, it's very intriguing. And I should probably check this out.
Yeah, the iPhone app is even better, I think, than the Mac version, because it has a tab bar at the bottom with some options like one's company information. So if I'm on your contact card in my address book, I can go to the company thing and it'll show macstories.net and it'll have some information. It'll show the URL for the main site. It'll show the URL for the RSS feed. Basically, it's going out to Mac Stories and it's pulling whatever URLs are embedded in that homepage and bringing them into the contacts automatically.
Nice.
Well, I think that's about it for this week, Federico. Thanks again to our sponsors, Audible and Hello Weather. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, though, you can find both of us writing at macstories.net, and you can also find us at Club Mac Stories. And on Twitter, Federico is at Viticci, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.